Could I say good evening and welcome, and certainly a great pleasure to host the launch of the 2013-2014 programme of the Knowledge Exchange Seminar Series. It is timely doing the launch during the visit of some very important guests to Northern Ireland. Trish Maverick, Presiding Officer of the Scottish Parliament. Trish, you're very, very welcome to Parliament Buildings. I know you're no stranger to Northern Ireland. And of course, Sean Orritt, the Cancollia of Dáil Éireann. And Sean, you're very, very welcome as well. And good to have you. And of course, John Burgo, Speaker of the House of Commons. And Speaker Burgo, you're extremely welcome here to Parliament Buildings. And tonight provides an opportunity to showcase a very, very important organisation, and certainly as a model of good practice that other UK legislators could draw on in the future. Knowledge Exchange Series is now well established and it's in its third year. It is jointly delivered by the Research and Information Service here within the Northern Ireland Assembly, and of course in partnership with all the three universities in Northern Ireland. We have Queen's University, the University of Ulster, and of course the Open University as well. And certainly working together, Knowledge Exchange Seminar aims to promote evidence-led policy and lawmaking within Northern Ireland to encourage debate and improve understanding. As the first partnership of its kind within the UK, formally linking the legislative arm of government to the Assembly, importantly makes those findings easily accessible to decision makers such as MLAs and, of course, very important Assembly committees. And certainly under the current devolution arrangements, the Assembly has both a scrutiny and advisory roles and responsibilities. KC seeks to address these relating to scrutiny, including that of committees and, of course, individual MLAs. And let me say scrutiny is a very key element of accountability. The Assembly relies on complex arrangements, processes in which to hold the executive to account. Such accountability both supports and is supported by evidence, transparency and involvement from key players, which together supports democratic governments, and certainly knowledge exchange plays an important role in this process. The series also presents networking opportunities like the launch here tonight, which has attracted a broad spread of attendees. Amongst you are MLAs, their staff, Assembly staff, public and private sector employees, academics, vulnerable in the community groups, and of course members of the public. Tonight's speakers have been asked to identify effective ways in which MLAs and academics can join together to look at legislative scrutiny and thereby better meet the needs of the people of Northern Ireland. In particular, our speakers will address how academics can exchange very, very much enhanced scrutiny capabilities. And I have to say the first speaker is Professor Brenton O'Leary from the University of Pennsylvania. And I must say, you're extremely welcome, Brenton, here this evening. We'll promote an international perspective, drawing on competitive research and experience that have relevance within a post-conflict society such as Northern Ireland. And of course, the second speaker, Dr. Duncan Morrow. And Duncan, you're extremely welcome. And I know you're no stranger here to Parliament Buildings. At one time, I was always thinking of maybe getting a seat in the Assembly. You were up here so often on a different role, and Duncan, of course, is from the University of Ulster. Will provide a local perspective on relying on research and experience within Northern Ireland. Let me say before I call Professor O'Leary, could I just say a word of thanks? I'm delighted at the turnout here this evening, and of course your presence makes the event. I think that's very, very important. I also want to say a word of thanks to our officials who have been working hard for some months in putting this event together. But I believe we will have an enjoyable evening, and I think we'll learn so much more on how we should, as public representatives, hold the government side to account, and most of all, I think looking at different ways in how we scrutinise the business of any institution, whether it be in Northern Ireland or whether it be further afield. So to you all, thank you. As I say, your presence has made the event here this evening. And I want to call on Professor O'Leary now to come and say some words to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, scholars of comparative politics isolate what is common, what is different, and what is unique across countries and cultures, and within them. This Assembly, like its predecessor, looks like a Commonwealth legislature, one that, with appropriate respect for Irish and Ulster Scots, largely conducts its business in English. Nevertheless, it resembles both the Scottish Parliament and Dáil Éireann, which was once in the Commonwealth. By contrast, this Assembly's power-sharing provisions are unique in these islands, and indeed in the former British Empire. That should occasion no anxiety. People can be too afraid of being unique, just as they can be angered by not having their differences recognised. The Assembly's committee places, like the Executive's, are allocated through the D'Hondt rule, also used in many European parliaments to determine seat allocations from votes cast for party lists, and in the European Parliament to fill committees. The rule, the D'Hondt rule, bears the name of a Belgian genius, but it was first invented by a man who, as late as 1774, called himself a British Protestant, namely Thomas Jefferson. He devised it to apportion the number of congressmen to be granted to each of the states of the United States according to their populations. So neither the mathematics nor imaginative uses of the Jefferson-D'Hondt rule are unique. The procedures to choose the executive and committees here resemble the allocation of executive offices in major Danish cities, including Copenhagen, and the Brussels capital region. And Northern Ireland shares with Belgium and the EU law-making provision for qualified majorities among designated communities or states. Designation is not unique, nor are others. Head for the Balkans if you doubt my word. The Assembly's power-sharing provisions bear comparison with long-term success stories in Switzerland, South Tyrol, and I would argue Belgium itself, and with more recent and unproven experiments in Macedonia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. The European Union operates with power-sharing provisions which, like those here, recognise parity among peoples, apply proportionality rules across committee structures and spending, respect national, religious and linguistic autonomy, and confirm veto rights. Academics may therefore help this Assembly by illuminating both successful and failed power-sharing systems. We may also show the significant variation in how the world's parliaments scrutinise the executive. Extraordinary variations exist even within the United States. Congressional representatives receive on average over $1,300,000 per annum on representational allowances to be spent on travel, mail and office staff in DC and in their districts, whereas in the state of New Hampshire, legislators are paid $100 per annum, per annum, and a modest per diem. Currently, and crudely put, in the wealthy ex-British and British parliamentary worlds, ministers have special advisers, whereas legislators have the services of non-partisan libraries and modest allowances to spend on staff, typically split among constituency offices and cheap young students or graduates who are not specialised, though they may be very good at drafting speeches. But in the more consensus-oriented Scandinavian systems, and indeed in the United States Congress, with which the Belfast Assembly should compare itself, at least in this respect, committees allocate resources to avail of expertise, both temporary and long-term. Does the Assembly here want to build standing professional expertise by committee and to fund such expertise, for example, according to the implicit proportion of public expenditure under scrutiny or some other such rule of thumb? Does it, by contrast, and these need not be alternatives, want to build up the expertise available to the individual MLA? There may be merit in allowing MLAs individually or pooling by party to develop two forms of expertise in addition to that provided by non-partisan library or research services. First, through the appointment of qualified senior policy advisors. Many variations are possible. One model would allocate one advisor to each chair and deputy chair. Then additional allowances might be allocated in proportion to party strength to enable MLAs, singly or pooled by party, to hire their own experts on short or longer term contracts. And secondly, through the appointment of modestly paid junior research officers, sufficient to cover transportation, meals and basic accommodation, in posts open to advanced undergraduates or recent graduates by competition. They would be appointed by the MLA subject to approval of their credentials, both by the relevant MLA's party protocols and the relevant Assembly Committee approval. An important innovation would be to channel appointment by specialist discipline rather than by hiring the generalists that are common to the British parliamentary tradition. An academy for the Assembly, in conjunction with local universities, might be developed with its own certifications. Across the planet, Interparliamentary Union survey data and other sources suggest widespread public aversion to nepotism and clientelism. This aversion is accompanied by demands for transparency in all public appointments. At the same time, more than one-fifth of the world's parliaments have had pay and allowance cuts since 2008. Populist demands to cut the size of legislatures are combined with demands that lawmakers work harder with less support. The temptation for underpaid legislators has been to appoint family and friends or to appoint fundraisers or district staff to assist them in re-election. Likewise, the temptation for ministers worldwide has been to appoint press officers rather than experts. The Assembly would do well to consider transparent ways of nurturing and appointing expertise that might win public approval, and from which all parties, and I do mean parties, stand to benefit. An Assembly divided by national, ethnic and religious alignments, as well as by party alignments, cannot easily develop its own common civil service, though it can enhance its research services. This Assembly can surely benefit from allowing its committees and its MLAs to develop their own technocratic capacities. Some wisdom comes free, but most expertise costs money. But it also saves money, and it's easier to defend before an austerity-conscious public. Thank you.
The truth of living in Northern Ireland is that we have had to deal with a sense of absence of trust. At every level, it has been common sense to mistrust what is going on. Teaching politics and history at the University of Ulster is a question not of dazzling your students with your great expertise, but of getting over the question that is asked as you walk into the room, which is, who's your man? The experience of universities over the years, however, has been that among the institutions of this community, they have probably been the most successful, both with engaging with the issue directly and with creating places where really difficult questions are addressed at a systematic level on a persistent and consistent basis. The task for universities in Northern Ireland has been to build learning communities which can continue to learn both on the subjects which are contentious, but create the space to deal with the issues which are less contentious. And so the universities don't come here simply to say, how can we work here, but to say we have an experience about how evidence and the process of research and the process of engagement and the process of commitment to an open and shared space actually can contribute to the development of the same thing within the political sphere. Because the task of politics is about leadership. And the two elements of leadership which strike me as most difficult are how is trust built and sustained and modelled then across this community, because when it fails in politics, it fails for the whole society. And secondly, how do we learn to do things for which there are not already quick and available answers, learning to do what we do not yet know how to do. And so, therefore, the provision of possibilities of building trust and of building learning are absolutely not optional extras in this community. They are the core of any bridge that we are going to build from the divided society that we have had in the past to the possibility of a sustainable political and social community into the future. So, if we were to define the tasks, we have to build something like a policy-making community. A community which goes beyond simply what is available in this assembly, but which in the end reinforces and sustains people in this assembly when they come to the point of taking their responsibility of decision-making. And critical to that, in a deeply partisan society in which the question of who says it, who's your man, is more important than what's said, the capacity to centre down on where the issues are on an evidence base is more critical than ever. Of course, we know that in universities that does not resolve all of the questions. However, it does allow us to scope out within a value base of submitting to evidence, particularly on a range of social and technical issues, what might produce a range of possible ways forward. But we come against a background in which all of our politics, frankly, was oppositional, and in which, as a result of the agreements we've made, all of us now have a responsibility for government. And how that culture change is made will depend in part on how the committees work, how they submit to evidence, and how they provide ways forward. There are, of course, huge risks to the politics of scrutiny in Northern Ireland. There is, in a system without an opposition, a strong absence of incentive to challenge orthodoxy. And there is a temptation to partisan rather than evidence-based scrutiny, but it need not be terminal. To be honest, this case series is part of putting a floor under people who've taken enormous risks to create a knowledge base for people, many of whose mandate has been constitutional rather than policy-focused, to build underneath a relative lack of experience, but nevertheless a strength of commitment in areas of policy which may not have been areas of expertise, and to build on the knowledge of parties of constitutional and often very deeply emotive issues, and to reinforce that with knowledge on technical and really important knowledge-based information on which to take decisions. So I do not see this as in any way optional or secondary. There is a huge academic potential contribution to policy making in Northern Ireland. Academia is, by its nature, constrained by a series of critical values, and those values are vital. Evidence basis, in other words, we don't challenge on who says it, we challenge on what's said. Number two, it is peer assessed, so it has to go through some process of recognition against other people who worked in the field and placed in some kind of relation to work done by a wide variety of international, not just simply local people. It is necessarily constrained in that way of trying to find answers which aren't pre-given. Of course, we have a history of ideology attaching itself to academia across the world, but good academics find uncomfortable answers. We are the place where inconvenient truth is protected, and need to be. We are a shared space, which means that the universities offer possibilities of not necessarily only coming here, but inviting you into our space. So this relationship over time can be an extremely fruitful one. And as I said to you, the international networks are part of the gateway which stop us being inward-looking. We run programs called Outward and Forward-Looking Region, when so often we've been an inward and backward-looking region. The universities offer a series of not only values but also capacities. The commitment to analysis and measurement, the commitment to evaluation, a technical expertise which is developed at the highest level, quality assurance which allows us to be anything that's produced in the universities to be contested elsewhere, and community engagement. We are part of this community. We have a commitment to it and to its flourishing. And so in that sense, we belong very much not only to the process, but to the outcomes. There are, of course, issues. We have to respect each other's parameters, and sometimes that will be difficult. Politicians have to make decisions. We have to give advice. We have to build the skills over time. This will be a dialogue, sometimes coming back and forward between the practical world and the academic world. The language seems to be very far apart, and we have to find a way to talk to each other in a way which bridges that gap. We have to manage some of the tensions between the convenient truths and the inconvenient truths, and learn to give each other this kind of information in a way which respects roles and develops complementarity rather than rivalry. But, having said all of that, universities provide opportunities to work through pilot projects, to work through partnerships, develop models of evaluation which are open and fair and measurable. Training and learning support, I hope that develops as well, not simply as research support. Research capacity. And as the KES programme, which has just been delivered, suggests, it is available in a huge variety in this community of areas which are the right province of this Assembly. So it isn't simply a question of conflict analysis, it's what do universities bring to technical debates in the environment, in finance, in science, in computing, in all of the other areas in which universities make a real difference. So, the question of trust. You've done a remarkable job. You've got the universities to work together. By working together, we will hopefully work with you. I hope that this is a very good start. I know that it is, having looked at the programme. And simply to say this, when you're talking about governance reform, I think the key reform should be that the Speaker is allowed to appoint MLAs. Thank you very much indeed.
I have to say as well, I am glad that there is now a very strong partnership between the three universities and ourselves within the Assembly. I would like to think that we can develop that partnership, that it's just not a partnership, that it's more than a partnership as we move this Assembly forward for the future. And I think that's vitally important for all of us. And we're building in that relationship, and we should continually build in that relationship so we all can benefit in how we move politics forward in Northern Ireland for the future. But once again, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.